Maria Santos stood barely 5 feet tall in her flight boots, her small frame dwarfed by the massive fighter jet behind her. The other pilots at the airbase couldn't help but smirk when they saw her walking across the tarmac. At 23 years old, she looked even younger, with delicate features that made some wonder if she had accidentally wandered onto a military installation. "Hey, little bird, you lost?" called out Lieutenant Rodriguez as she passed by the hangar. His fellow pilots chuckled, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Maria kept walking, her jaw set in determination. But inside, the familiar sting of doubt crept in. She had heard it all before during her training at the flight academy. Instructors questioned whether someone her size could handle the physical demands of aerial combat. Fellow cadets whispered that she only made it through because the military needed to fill diversity quotas. Even her own family had expressed concern when she announced her decision to become a fighter pilot. "Mija, flying is dangerous work," her father had said, his weathered hands gripping her shoulders. "Maybe you should consider something safer like teaching or nursing." Her mother nodded in agreement, worry etched across her face. They meant well, but their lack of confidence hurt more than any stranger's mockery. The doubts weren't entirely unfounded from a physical standpoint. Fighter jets demanded incredible strength to withstand G-forces that could reach 8 times the pull of gravity. The aircraft's controls required firm handling, and the ejection seats were designed with larger pilots in mind. Maria knew all of this, yet something deep inside her refused to accept that her size meant she couldn't excel. During flight school, she had pushed herself harder than anyone else. While other cadets socialized in the evenings, Maria studied aircraft manuals and practiced emergency procedures until she could recite them perfectly. She spent extra hours in the simulator, honing her reflexes until her responses became instinctive. Her instructors couldn't deny her technical skills, but they remained skeptical about her combat readiness. The day she received her assignment to the 15th Fighter Squadron, Maria felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She was finally achieving her dream, but she knew the real test lay ahead. The squadron had a reputation for excellence, and they had never had a female pilot, much less one who looked like she could be blown away by a strong wind. Captain Williams, the squadron commander, had been direct during their first meeting. "Santos, I'm going to be honest with you," he said, not looking up from her file. "You've got impressive scores, but combat is different from training. When bullets start flying, I need to know that every pilot in my squadron can handle the pressure. Your size concerns me." Maria straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Sir, I understand your concerns, but I didn't come this far to fail. Give me a chance to prove myself." The captain studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fair enough. You'll be flying as Hawk 7. Lieutenant Martinez will be your wingman initially, but you'll need to earn the respect of this squadron through your actions, not your academy scores." That first week at the base was the longest of Maria's life. She ate alone in the mess hall while other pilots gathered in tight groups, sharing stories and jokes she wasn't invited to hear. During briefings, she could feel eyes on her, waiting for her to make a mistake or show weakness. The pressure was suffocating, but she refused to let it break her. Her aircraft, an F-16 Fighting Falcon, became her sanctuary. Inside the cockpit, her size was actually an advantage. She fit perfectly into the confined space, and her smaller stature meant less weight for the aircraft to carry. She spent hours familiarizing herself with every switch, gauge, and control until the plane felt like an extension of her own body. The breakthrough came during a training exercise 3 weeks after her arrival. The squadron was practicing air-to-air combat maneuvers against a visiting unit when Maria found herself in a disadvantageous position, outnumbered 2-1. Her radio crackled with advice from other pilots, but she tuned them out, trusting her instincts instead. Using her aircraft's superior maneuverability, she executed a series of precise turns that her opponents couldn't match. Within minutes, she had maneuvered behind both enemy aircraft, achieving simulated kills on both targets. The radio fell silent as other pilots processed what they had witnessed. "Nice flying, Hawk 7, came Captain Williams's voice over the comm. "Very nice flying indeed." For the first time since arriving at the base, Maria allowed herself a small smile. She was beginning to prove that being underestimated could sometimes be the greatest advantage of all. The months that followed Maria's successful training exercise brought gradual acceptance from her squadron mates. Lieutenant Martinez, initially assigned as her wingman out of concern for her capabilities, became one of her strongest advocates. He had witnessed firsthand her precision flying and tactical awareness during subsequent training missions. "She's got something special," Martinez told the other pilots over drinks one evening. "I've flown with a lot of people, and Santos sees angles that most of us miss. She thinks 3 moves ahead." The compliment meant everything to Maria, though she tried not to show how much the acceptance mattered to her. She had learned to project confidence even when uncertainty gnawed at her insides. Each successful mission built her reputation incrementally, but she knew that one mistake could undo months of progress. Her technical skills continued to improve with each flight. Maria discovered that her smaller hands gave her an advantage in reaching certain controls quickly during high-stress situations. Her lighter weight allowed for more fuel efficiency, extending mission range. Most importantly, her size made her less visible in the cockpit, a factor that would prove crucial in combat situations. Captain Williams began assigning her more complex missions as her competence became undeniable. She flew reconnaissance sorties along hostile borders, executed precision strikes on training targets, and participated in joint exercises with Allied forces. Each assignment reinforced her growing confidence and the squadron's faith in her abilities. The geopolitical situation in their region had been deteriorating for months. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity across the border, with hostile aircraft probing their airspace more frequently. The squadron's mission briefings took on a more serious tone, as the possibility of actual combat loomed larger. During one particularly tense briefing, Colonel Harrison, the base commander, addressed the assembled pilots with unusual gravity. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, nodding toward Maria, "the situation is escalating. Our radar stations have detected significant enemy buildup just beyond our borders. We need to be prepared for the possibility of defensive action." Maria felt her pulse quicken. All her training had been building toward this moment, but the reality of potential combat brought a mixture of excitement and fear. She looked around at her fellow pilots, seeing similar expressions of anticipation and concern on their faces. The first real test came during a routine patrol mission along the disputed border. Maria was flying as part of a 4-aircraft formation when their radar operators reported multiple unidentified aircraft approaching their airspace. The radio crackled with terse communications as the situation developed rapidly. "Hawk Flight, we have multiple bandits approaching from the northeast. 12 aircraft, unknown type, crossing into our airspace," came the voice of the air traffic controller. Captain Williams, leading the formation, responded immediately. "Roger, Control. Hawk Flight is moving to intercept. All aircraft arm weapons and prepare for engagement." Maria's hands moved automatically across her controls, activating weapon systems and adjusting her radar settings. Her heart pounded, but her training took over. This was what she had prepared for through countless hours of simulation and practice. As they closed on the approaching aircraft, the enemy formation became visible on their radar screens. 12 fighters in tight formation, clearly military aircraft with hostile intent. The radio filled with rapid communications as pilots reported positions and prepared for engagement. "Hawk 7, maintain formation and watch for flanking maneuvers," Captain Williams instructed. "These guys are professionals, not amateurs." The enemy aircraft had superior numbers, but Maria's squadron held the advantage of defending their own territory with ground-based radar support. As the two formations approached each other, Maria noticed something that her squadron mates had missed. "Hawk Lead, this is Hawk 7, she transmitted. "Enemy formation is showing a gap on the left side. Looks like they're trying to draw us into their main force while a smaller group flanks from the west." Captain Williams checked his radar display and confirmed her observation. "Good eye, Hawk 7. Martinez, take Hawk 6 and cover that western approach. Hawk 7, you're with me on the main group." The engagement began with a flurry of missile launches from both sides. Maria watched her radar screen as contrails streaked across the sky, marking the paths of weapons seeking their targets. Her training had prepared her for this chaos, but the reality was overwhelming in its intensity. Missile lock," called out Lieutenant Torres as an enemy weapon tracked toward his aircraft. Maria watched him execute evasive maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares to confuse the incoming missile. The weapon detonated harmlessly behind his aircraft, but the close call reminded everyone of the stakes involved. Maria found herself facing 2 enemy fighters that had broken away from their main formation. Her smaller size proved advantageous as she maneuvered her aircraft through tight turns that her opponents couldn't match. She achieved a firing solution on the first enemy fighter and launched a missile, watching it streak toward its target. The explosion was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had achieved her first combat victory. But there was no time to celebrate as the second enemy fighter maneuvered aggressively toward her position. The real test of her abilities was just beginning, and Maria knew that everything she had worked for would be decided in the next few minutes of aerial combat. The second enemy fighter pilot proved to be far more skilled than the first. Maria found herself in a deadly dance of aerial maneuvers as both aircraft pushed their machines to the limits of performance. Her opponent seemed determined to prove that size and experience mattered more than agility and precision. Hawk 7, you've got another bandit closing on your 6 o'clock. Martinez's voice crackled through her headset. He was engaged with his own targets, but had spotted the additional threat approaching Maria's position. Maria's breath caught as she realized she was about to face 2 enemy aircraft simultaneously. Her radar warning receiver screamed with alerts as multiple targeting systems locked onto her fighter. The situation had escalated from challenging to potentially fatal in seconds. Drawing on every lesson from her training, Maria executed a complex series of maneuvers that would have been impossible for a larger, less agile pilot. She rolled her aircraft inverted and pulled into a steep dive, using her superior knowledge of the local terrain to her advantage. The mountains below provided natural obstacles that she could use to break enemy targeting locks. Where did she go? Came a frustrated transmission from one of the enemy pilots, broadcast on an open frequency. Maria had disappeared from their radar screens by flying dangerously low through a mountain valley, using the terrain to mask her position. Captain Williams, monitoring the engagement from his own position, felt a mixture of concern and admiration. Hawk 7, report your status, he called out, hoping she was still alive. Hawk 7 is alive and maneuvering for advantage, Maria responded, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She was climbing back to altitude on the opposite side of the mountain range, positioning herself behind the enemy aircraft that had been hunting her. The tables had turned completely. Maria now held the tactical advantage, approaching 2 enemy fighters whose pilots believed they had forced her to retreat. Her small size had worked in her favor once again, allowing her to execute maneuvers that larger pilots might not have attempted. Fox 2, Maria called out, announcing her missile launch. The weapon streaked toward the nearest enemy fighter, whose pilot had only seconds to react. The missile found its target with devastating effect, sending the aircraft spiraling toward the ground in flames. The remaining enemy pilot, realizing his disadvantage, attempted to disengage from the combat. But Maria had learned from observing her opponent's tactics during the engagement. She anticipated his escape route and positioned herself to intercept. Not today, she muttered under her breath as she maneuvered for a final firing solution. Her last missile launch ended the engagement decisively, eliminating the threat and clearing the immediate airspace of hostile aircraft. The radio erupted with congratulations from her squadron mates as they regrouped and assessed the results of the engagement. The enemy formation had been decisively defeated, with minimal losses on their side. Maria had accounted for 3 confirmed victories, more than any other pilot in the engagement. Outstanding work, Hawk 7, Captain Williams transmitted. Your tactical awareness saved this mission. As they flew back to base, Maria felt a profound change in how her fellow pilots regarded her. The radio chatter included her as an equal participant, rather than someone who needed protection or guidance. She had proven herself in the most definitive way possible. The debriefing session that followed was unlike any Maria had experienced. Intelligence officers were particularly interested in her observations about enemy tactics and capabilities. Her small size had allowed her to make maneuvers that provided unique intelligence about enemy aircraft performance. Limitations: your ability to disappear from their radar by flying through that valley was brilliant, the intelligence officer noted. Larger aircraft couldn't have made those turns safely. You exploited a tactical advantage that we hadn't considered before. Colonel Harrison personally commended Maria during the debrief. Santos, what you accomplished today will be studied and taught to future pilots. You've shown that unconventional advantages can be just as valuable as traditional ones. The mess hall that evening was a different place for Maria. Pilots who had previously ignored her now sought her out, asking about her tactics and wanting to understand how she had achieved such remarkable results. The conversation was professional but warm. marking her final acceptance into the Brotherhood of Combat Pilots. Lieutenant Torres, who had barely escaped an enemy missile earlier in the day, raised his coffee cup in a toast. To Hawk 7, who proved that the best things come in small packages. The laughter that followed was inclusive rather than mocking, marking a complete transformation in her relationship with the squadron. Maria smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving at the base, feeling like she truly belonged. But even as she celebrated this victory, Maria knew that the enemy would likely return with new tactics and increased determination. The conflict was far from over, and her next test would probably be even more challenging than what she had just survived. The weeks following Maria's first combat success brought an escalation in enemy activity that surprised even the most experienced intelligence analysts. Satellite imagery revealed massive military buildups across the border, with aircraft, ground forces, and missile systems being positioned for what appeared to be a major offensive operation. "They're planning something big," Colonel Harrison told the assembled pilots during an emergency briefing. "Our allies have reported similar buildups along their borders. This isn't just about our sector anymore. We're looking at the possibility of a coordinated multi-front assault." Maria studied the intelligence photos with growing concern. The enemy had tripled their aircraft numbers in the region and introduced new types of fighters that their intelligence services had never seen before. The technological advantage that her squadron had enjoyed was evaporating rapidly. Captain Williams outlined the new defensive strategy during subsequent planning sessions. "We're going to be outnumbered by at least 3-1 when they come," he explained. "Our survival will depend on superior tactics, better training, and making every shot count." The squadron's training intensity increased dramatically as they prepared for the expected assault. Maria found herself flying multiple sorties each day, practicing everything from air-to-air combat to ground attack missions. Her small size, once viewed as a disadvantage, now allowed her to handle the increased flight schedule better than many of her larger colleagues. During one particularly grueling training session, Maria demonstrated a tactic that impressed even the most experienced pilots. She had learned to use her aircraft's smaller radar signature combined with her compact size to approach enemy formations almost invisibly. Her fellow pilots dubbed it ghost mode and began incorporating similar techniques into their own flying. "Santos has changed how we think about aerial combat," Martinez observed to the other pilots. "She's proving that stealth and precision can be more valuable than raw power." The anticipated attack came 3 weeks later, just before dawn on a Tuesday morning. Maria was awakened by the base alarm system blaring throughout the barracks. She rolled out of bed and was running toward the flight line before she was fully awake, muscle memory taking over as she grabbed her flight gear. "This is not a drill," came the announcement over the base loudspeaker system. "All pilots report to aircraft immediately. We have multiple radar contacts approaching from the north, east, and west." The pre-flight preparations that normally took 20 minutes were completed in less than 10, as ground crews worked frantically to prepare aircraft for combat. Maria climbed into her cockpit as weapons were still being loaded onto her fighter, the familiar routine providing some comfort in the chaos. "Hawk flight. We're facing the largest enemy formation ever detected in this region," Captain Williams transmitted as they taxied toward the runway, 50-plus aircraft in multiple waves. "Our job is to break up their attack formations and protect the civilian populations behind us." Maria's heart raced as she processed the numbers. 50 enemy aircraft against their squadron of 12 fighters was odds that no tactical manual had ever contemplated. They would need to be perfect in their execution and incredibly lucky to survive the encounter. The takeoff was the fastest she had ever experienced, with aircraft launching at minimum intervals to get as many defenders airborne as possible. As they climbed to altitude, Maria could see the enemy formations on her radar display, approaching like storm clouds on the horizon. Multiple flights of bandits, various altitudes from Angels 15 to Angels 30, reported the air traffic controller. "They're coming in waves, probably trying to overwhelm our defensive response." Maria checked her weapon systems one final time as they approached the intercept point. She carried a full load of air-to-air missiles plus ammunition for her cannon, but she knew that ammunition would be critical in an extended engagement against such overwhelming numbers. "Hawk flight. Engage at will," Captain Williams ordered as the first enemy aircraft appeared on their radar scopes. "Remember your training and watch each other's backs. Good luck to all of you." The first wave of enemy fighters consisted of 12 aircraft flying in tight formation, clearly confident in their numerical superiority. Maria watched as her squadron mates engaged different elements of the enemy formation, but she noticed something that others might have missed. "Hawk lead, this is Hawk 7, she transmitted. "The second wave is positioning for a flanking attack while we're engaged with the first wave. They're using the first group as bait." Captain Williams confirmed her observation and quickly adjusted their tactics. "Good catch, Hawk 7. You take Martinez and intercept that second wave before they can get into position. The rest of us will handle the immediate threat." Maria found herself flying toward 8 enemy fighters with only Martinez as backup. Odds that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But her confidence had grown with each successful mission, and she knew that her unconventional advantages could level the playing field if she used them correctly. As she closed on the enemy formation, Maria noticed that they were flying in a predictable pattern that suggested overconfidence. They clearly didn't consider 2 defending fighters to be a serious threat to their larger formation. That assumption was about to prove costly for them. Maria and Martinez approached the enemy formation using a tactic they had practiced extensively during training. Martinez would attract attention by making himself visible on radar while Maria approached from below, using the ground clutter to mask her presence until the last possible moment. 8 bandits in standard attack formation, Martinez reported over the radio. "They're maintaining course and speed, probably expecting us to engage head-on." "Negative," Maria responded. "I'm seeing gaps in their formation that we can exploit. Follow my lead and be ready to break on my signal." The enemy pilots were indeed overconfident, maintaining loose formation discipline that created opportunities for a smaller, more agile attacking force. Maria had studied enemy tactics extensively since her first combat encounter and recognized the weaknesses in their standard approach. She executed a climbing turn that brought her aircraft up through a cloud layer, temporarily disappearing from enemy radar screens. When she emerged above the clouds, she found herself perfectly positioned above the enemy formation, invisible against the bright morning sky. "Fox 2, Maria called out, announcing her first missile launch. The weapon streaked downward toward the lead enemy aircraft, whose pilot had no warning of the attack from above. The missile impact sent the enemy fighter spiraling toward the ground, immediately disrupting the formation's cohesion. The remaining enemy pilots reacted with confusion as they tried to locate the source of the attack. Their formation scattered as each pilot maneuvered defensively, destroying any coordinated attack plan they might have had. Martinez seized the opportunity created by Maria's surprise attack, engaging 2 enemy fighters that had broken away from the main group. His missiles found their targets with deadly precision, further reducing the enemy force and creating additional chaos in their ranks. "Where are they coming from?" came a panicked transmission from one of the enemy pilots, broadcast on an open frequency. The confidence that had characterized their approach was rapidly evaporating, as their numerical advantage proved meaningless against superior tactics. Maria pressed her advantage, using her aircraft's superior maneuverability to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. She had discovered during training that her small size allowed her to execute tighter turns at higher G-forces than larger pilots could manage, giving her an edge in close-range aerial combat. Her second missile eliminated another enemy fighter, but she was now running low on long-range weapons. The remaining enemy aircraft had regrouped and were attempting to surround her position, forcing her to rely on her cannon for the remainder of the engagement. "Hawk 7, you've got multiple bandits converging on your position," Martinez warned. He was engaged with his own targets and couldn't provide immediate assistance. But his situational awareness helped Maria understand the developing threat. Maria dove toward the deck, using the terrain below to break enemy targeting locks while positioning herself for gun attacks on the pursuing aircraft. Her intimate knowledge of the local geography, gained through months of training flights, gave her advantages that the enemy pilots couldn't match. The first enemy fighter that followed her into the valley learned too late that Maria knew exactly where every ridge and obstacle was located. She led him into a narrow canyon where his larger aircraft couldn't maneuver effectively, then reversed course and eliminated him with a short burst from her cannon. "Splash 6, Maria reported, marking her 6th victory of the engagement. But the celebration was premature as warning tones filled her cockpit. indicating that she was being targeted by multiple enemy radar systems simultaneously. 2 enemy fighters had positioned themselves at opposite ends of the valley, creating a trap that seemed impossible to escape. Their pilots were coordinating their attacks to prevent her from using the terrain advantages that had served her so well throughout the engagement. Maria's training took over as she analyzed the tactical situation with remarkable calm. Considering the mortal danger she faced, she noticed that both enemy aircraft were flying predictable patterns as they closed on her position, probably assuming that she was trapped with no escape options. "Time to get creative," she muttered to herself, as she armed her remaining missiles and prepared for what might be her final maneuvers as a pilot. The enemy aircraft were closing rapidly from both directions, but Maria had one advantage they hadn't considered. Her small aircraft could fit through gaps in the canyon walls that larger fighters couldn't navigate. She had spotted a narrow passage during previous training flights that would allow her to escape the trap. While positioning herself behind the enemy aircraft at the maneuver required perfect timing and exceptional flying skills, but Maria had spent months preparing for exactly this type of situation. She rolled her aircraft inverted and pulled into a steep climbing turn that brought her through the narrow passage just as the enemy fighters reached her previous position. Both enemy pilots, expecting to find her trapped between them, instead found themselves facing each other across an empty valley. Maria emerged behind them with perfect firing solutions on both aircraft, her final 2 missiles ending the engagement decisively. The radio crackled with amazed transmissions from other pilots who had witnessed her escape and counterattack. "How did she do that?" came one voice. "That passage looked too narrow for any aircraft." "Not if you're small enough," Martinez replied with obvious admiration. "Hawk 7 just used her size to turn a death trap into a victory." As Maria climbed back to altitude to rejoin the main engagement, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed since arriving at the base. The same physical characteristics that had once been viewed as limitations had become her greatest tactical advantages in aerial combat. As Maria climbed back to rejoin the main battle, her radio filled with urgent transmissions from her squadron mates. The situation had deteriorated rapidly, while she and Martinez were engaged with the flanking force. The third wave of enemy aircraft had arrived ahead of schedule, bringing the total number of hostile fighters to over 60. "Hawk Flight, we're being overwhelmed," came Captain Williams's strained voice over the radio. "We need immediate assistance on the western vector. Multiple bandits are breaking through our defensive line." Maria could see the scope of the disaster developing on her radar display. Enemy aircraft were scattered across the sky in multiple engagements, and her squadron's aircraft were spread thin trying to cover all approaches. Several friendly contacts had already disappeared from the screen, indicating either destroyed aircraft or pilots forced to withdraw due to damage or fuel shortage. "Martinez, we need to get back into this fight immediately," Maria transmitted to her wingman. "The squadron is getting chopped up while we've been playing in the canyon." They accelerated toward the main battle area, but Maria realized that conventional tactics would be insufficient against such overwhelming numbers. The enemy had learned from previous encounters and was using coordinated attacks that made individual heroics less effective. "Hawk 7, this is Control," came a transmission from the base air traffic controller. "We're showing 12 enemy aircraft approaching the civilian evacuation routes. You're the closest friendly unit that can intercept." Maria's blood ran cold as she processed the implications. While the military forces were engaged in aerial combat, enemy aircraft were moving to attack defenseless civilian targets. The evacuation convoys contained thousands of families fleeing the combat zone, including many children and elderly residents. "Roger, Control. Hawk 7 is moving to intercept," she responded immediately, knowing that she was committing to face 12 enemy fighters with only Martinez as backup. The odds were even worse than what they had just survived, but civilian lives hung in the balance. Martinez understood the situation without lengthy explanations. "I'm with you, Hawk 7. Let's go save some lives." They dove toward the evacuation route at maximum speed, pushing their aircraft to performance limits that would have been impossible to sustain for extended periods. Maria's smaller size once again proved advantageous, allowing her to withstand the extreme G-forces better than larger pilots might have managed. The enemy aircraft were already beginning their attack runs on the civilian convoys when Maria and Martinez arrived on scene. Explosions bloomed along the highway as the first enemy missiles found their targets among the fleeing vehicles. The sight of civilian casualties filled Maria with a cold fury that focused her tactical thinking with laser precision. 12 bandits in attack formation, engaging civilian targets, Maria reported. Martinez, take the northern group. I'll handle the southern attack element. Copy that, Hawk 7. Make them pay for targeting civilians. Maria had never felt more motivated in her entire military career. Every training exercise, every flight hour, every moment of preparation had led to this critical moment where her actions could save hundreds of innocent lives. She engaged the southern group of enemy fighters with a level of aggression and skill that surprised even herself. Her first missile eliminated the lead aircraft before its pilot realized he was under attack. Her second missile destroyed another fighter as it maneuvered to escape her initial assault. The remaining enemy pilots in her sector scattered as they tried to comprehend how a single fighter had disrupted their entire attack formation. Their confusion gave Maria additional opportunities to press her assault using tactics that she had perfected through months of combat experience. Fox 3, she called out, announcing a cannon attack on an enemy fighter that had attempted to flee toward friendly territory. The burst of cannon fire sent the aircraft tumbling out of control, marking her 11th victory of the day. Martinez was equally successful against his assigned targets, eliminating 3 enemy aircraft in rapid succession using missiles and cannon fire. His aggressive tactics complemented Maria's approach perfectly, creating a coordinated defense that far exceeded what 2 pilots should have been able to accomplish against such numbers. Multiple splashes on both attack groups, Martinez reported with satisfaction. The civilians are safe for now. But Maria noticed additional enemy contacts appearing on her radar screen, indicating that reinforcements were approaching the area. The enemy command structure had apparently decided that eliminating the troublesome defending fighters was worth committing additional resources to the sector. Martinez, we've got company incoming from the east, Maria warned. Looks like they're sending everything they have left to finish us off. The approaching enemy formation consisted of their most experienced pilots flying their most advanced aircraft. Maria recognized the tactical sophistication of their approach, indicating that they were no longer dealing with overconfident attackers, but with skilled professionals determined to eliminate the defensive threat. Hawk 7. Control is showing 16 additional bandits approaching your position. Recommend immediate withdrawal to base. Maria considered the controller's advice carefully. She and Martinez had already exceeded all reasonable expectations for a 2-aircraft patrol, and discretion might indeed be the better part of valor at this point. But she also knew that withdrawing would leave the civilian evacuation routes completely undefended. Negative, Control. Civilians are still evacuating through this sector. We'll hold position and engage incoming hostiles. Martinez confirmed his agreement without hesitation. Both pilots understood that they were probably committing to a fight they couldn't win, but the alternative of abandoning defenseless civilians was unacceptable to them both. The final enemy formation approached with the methodical precision of veteran combat pilots who had studied the tactics that had been so effective against their previous units. Maria could see on her radar display that they were flying a complex pattern designed to prevent the surprise attacks and terrain masking techniques that had given her advantages in earlier engagements. 16. Bandits in coordinated attack formation, Maria reported to Martinez. They're using overlapping coverage to eliminate our tactical advantages. We'll need to try something completely different. Martinez checked his weapon status and fuel levels before responding. I'm down to 2 missiles and about 20 minutes of fuel. How do you want to play this? Maria studied her own aircraft status while analyzing the approaching enemy formation. She was in similar condition regarding weapons and fuel, but an idea was forming that might allow them to even the odds despite their desperate situation. Martinez, what if we don't try to fight all 16 at once? She suggested. What if we make them come to us 1 or 2 at a time? I'm listening, but we don't have much terrain left to work with down here. Maria had noticed during previous engagements that enemy pilots seemed to have difficulty coordinating their attacks when their formations were disrupted by aggressive frontal assaults. Their standard tactics relied on maintaining formation discipline, which became a weakness when faced with unconventional approaches. Follow my lead and be ready for some very tight maneuvering, she transmitted. We're going to fly straight at them. and then split their formation using speed and surprise. The tactic was incredibly risky because it required flying directly toward 16 enemy fighters who would have multiple opportunities to engage them during the approach. But Maria had calculated that their small size and superior maneuverability might allow them to penetrate the enemy formation before effective countermeasures could be deployed. They accelerated toward the enemy aircraft at maximum speed, approaching head-on in a manner that violated every tactical doctrine Maria had ever studied. The enemy pilots, expecting a more conventional defensive approach, were caught off guard by the aggressive frontal assault. "Fox 2, Maria called out as she launched her first missile at the center of the enemy formation. The weapon streaked toward the lead aircraft, forcing the entire enemy formation to break apart to avoid the explosion that followed. Martinez followed with his own missile launch, further disrupting enemy formation integrity and creating the chaos that they needed to survive the engagement. Enemy aircraft scattered in all directions as pilots maneuvered to avoid collisions with their own wingmen. "Now we fight them individually instead of as a group," Maria transmitted as she selected her first target from the scattered enemy aircraft. Her cannon fire eliminated an enemy fighter that had become separated from his wingman, marking her 12th victory of the day. The number surprised her as she realized its significance. 12 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single combat mission was a record that no pilot in her squadron had ever approached, let alone achieved. But there was no time to contemplate the achievement as multiple enemy fighters maneuvered to engage her position. Martinez scored his own victories in rapid succession, eliminating 2 enemy fighters with his remaining missiles and then engaging a third with cannon fire. His aggressive tactics complemented Maria's approach perfectly, creating a whirlwind of destruction that the enemy pilots couldn't counter effectively. But the enemy numbers were still overwhelming, and Maria found herself facing multiple aircraft simultaneously as the remaining hostile pilots regrouped and coordinated their attacks. Her fuel gauge showed critically low levels, meaning that this engagement would be decided within the next few minutes regardless of tactical considerations. "Hawk 7, you've got 3 bandits closing on your 6 o'clock, Martinez warned, even as he maneuvered to engage his own pursuers. The radio discipline that had characterized their earlier coordination was breaking down as both pilots fought for their lives against impossible odds. Maria executed a series of defensive maneuvers that pushed both her aircraft and her own physical limits to their breaking points. The G-forces generated by her tight turns would have incapacitated larger pilots, but her small frame allowed her to maintain consciousness and control throughout the violent maneuvering. Her cannon fire eliminated the closest pursuing aircraft, but the victory was costly as it positioned her directly in front of 2 additional enemy fighters. Their missiles launched simultaneously, creating a deadly crossfire that seemed impossible to evade. Using every skill she had developed throughout her flying career, Maria managed to defeat both missile attacks through a combination of electronic countermeasures and violent maneuvering that brought her aircraft to the very edge of structural failure. The near-miss explosions from the defeated missiles damaged several of her aircraft systems, but she remained airborne and combat-capable. "Impossible," came a transmission from one of the enemy pilots. "How is she still flying?" Maria's response was to eliminate his aircraft with a precise cannon burst that demonstrated exactly why she was still flying. Her 14th victory of the day brought gasps of amazement from controllers and pilots monitoring the engagement from multiple bases across the region. Martinez, inspired by Maria's example, pressed his own attacks with renewed determination. His cannon fire eliminated 2 additional enemy aircraft, bringing his total for the day to 7 victories. Together, they had destroyed over 20 enemy fighters in what military historians would later call one of the most remarkable aerial engagements in combat history. The remaining enemy pilots, their formation completely shattered, and their numerical advantage negated by superior tactics and extraordinary flying skills, began withdrawing from the engagement. Their retreat marked the end of the enemy's coordinated assault on the civilian evacuation routes and the failure of their entire multi-wave attack strategy. "All bandits are withdrawing from the sector," reported the air traffic controller with obvious relief. "Hawk 7 and Hawk 8, you are cleared to return to base immediately. Outstanding work to both of you." As they flew back toward their base, Maria reflected on the transformation that had occurred in her life and career. She had arrived at the squadron as an untested pilot, whose capabilities were questioned by everyone around her. She was returning as the pilot who had achieved the most remarkable single-mission combat record in the squadron's history. 12 victories in one mission, Martinez said over the radio. "Maria, they're going to write books about what you accomplished today." The base came into view ahead of them, and Maria could see fire trucks and ambulances standing by in case their damaged aircraft required emergency assistance during landing. But her fighter, despite the battle damage it had sustained, was flying normally and responding to her control inputs. As she touched down on the runway, Maria saw hundreds of base personnel lining the taxiways to witness her return. Pilots, ground crews, maintenance technicians, and administrative staff had all turned out to see the pilot, who had single-handedly changed the course of the battle. Captain Williams met her as she climbed down from her aircraft, his expression showing a mixture of amazement and respect that would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. "Santos, what you accomplished today will be remembered for generations. You've proven that courage and skill matter more than size or conventional expectations." The debriefing that followed lasted for hours as intelligence officers documented every detail of the engagement. For analysis and future tactical development, Maria's innovative approaches to aerial combat would be incorporated into training programs and operational doctrine throughout the military, but perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Colonel Harrison personally congratulated her in front of the assembled squadron. "Lieutenant Santos, you have demonstrated that excellence comes in all sizes, and that determination can overcome any perceived disadvantage. Your actions today saved thousands of civilian lives and changed how we think about aerial warfare." That evening, as Maria sat in the mess hall surrounded by fellow pilots who now viewed her as a legend, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. Every doubt, every challenge, every moment of uncertainty had contributed to building the pilot who could achieve 12 victories in a single combat mission. The little girl who had once been told she was too small to fly fighter jets had become the pilot whose size had proven to be her greatest advantage when it mattered most. Maria Santos had not only earned her place among the greatest combat pilots in history, but had redefined what was possible for those who refused to accept limitations imposed by others.